Hey, what's going on, y'all? Pavel with DAT Media here, and today we're going to be discussing Nikon D700 and whether you should still consider it in 2018. Talking about cameras these days can be really difficult. At the end of the day, there's so many different models. You have Sony, you have Canon, you have Nikon, you have Fuji, you have all kinds of others that I'm not gonna even mention. So how do you pick the right one? Usually when people ask me the never-ending question about Canon or Nikon, I usually tell them it's a personal preference. Why? Because at this point in the game, it really doesn't matter. All of those cameras just have the same CMOS sensor. Most of them have the same amount of megapixels. Most of them have the same features. So it really is, at this point, it's brand loyalty and personal preference. I know a lot of people prefer the color on the Canon. I like the color of the Nikon. At the end of the day, it's really up to you to decide which camera you like to purchase. But the camera I'm gonna talk about today is a very interesting one. It was released back in 2008, so today is 2018, so it's 10 years old. But is it still relevant though? I think that this camera is still great. I have shot pretty much everything under the sun with this camera at this point, and it still is going like there is no tomorrow. Now I should mention something right off the bat for those of you who are waiting for me to get into video aspects of the camera and whether it shoots 4K and all that kind of stuff. Well, I will tell you right now that it shoots at amazing resolution of 0K. And yes, you guessed it, it does not do video at all. So for those of you who are interested in the camera that will do still and video work, this camera is not for you because it simply does not shoot video. However, if you are a still photographer, I do think that you should really give this camera a consideration. Boom, here it is, Nikon D700. Now, it is kind of old, and it has all kinds of dents and bangs and all kinds of stuff on it, but it's still kicking, and it's kicking, again, as I said, like there is no tomorrow. It is a magnesium alloy body, which means it withstands any weather condition. Pretty much you can freeze it in your freezer and take it out the next day, defrost it, and it will probably still work, and work quite well, actually. The other really important factor of this camera is that it has a 12.1 megapixel sensor, but it is a full frame sensor, which means that you really get the surface area on that sensor to shoot in low light situations. And this camera is amazing in low light. The ISO range on this camera is between 200 to 6400. Extended ISO you can push up to 25,600. You can also bring the ISO down all the way to 100. Now for those of you who are asking what kind of cards does this camera take, this camera takes compact flash cards. And yes, these are not SD cards, these are compact flash cards. Some of you are not even probably familiar with what these are. Most of you probably are familiar with what they are, but it only has one slot. It does not have multiple card slots like the newer cameras do nowadays, where they allow you to put two cards at the same time and shoot it with redundancy or for extension of space purposes, etc, etc, etc. This camera just has one slot, one compact flash card, that's all you get. It does shoot JPEG and RAW. It does shoot uncompressed RAW 14-bit, so you do really, in post-production, especially when I edited RAW files from this camera, they're still amazing. You can really bring up, you can bring down the highlights, you can bring up the dark parts of the image. This camera does a really amazing job for you to pull an image into post-production and really have a creative way with it, or just do some light touching up, which is usually what I do because I don't like overly edited images, but it still gives you that range to go, even if you want to go crazy with post-production, it does give you that range to go crazy with post-production. The menu system in the camera, if you have owned an Nikon or never owned an Nikon, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. You just look, you have a ton of options in there in the menu system. All of them are pretty straightforward. Nothing really to talk about there. I mean, again, the main points of this camera that I want to advertise to people are its low light performance, which is amazing. Its rugged body, I mean, you can, I don't know, I wouldn't advise you dropping it from like a 10-story building, but it holds up pretty well to banging and scratching. I've shot a ton of concerts with this camera where I gotta walk around and the camera bangs into things and it still works just fine. It does have a built-in flash, although I wouldn't advise you using it. I've never used it. As a matter of fact, I've known photographers who actually rip that flash off because they get tired of the thing popping up and down all the time, just like this. So they just rip it out, and when they need to use a flash, they probably pop one on, or they usually use remote flashes if they're shooting in the studio. Now the dials on this camera, you have your aperture dial in the front if you're using a lens with contacts that you don't have to manually adjust the aperture on the lens. Shutter speed on the back. You have your white balance, ISO, and quality button right here, so you don't even need to go into menus or anything like that to change those settings. So pretty much one of the top reasons for me recommending this camera to people is its ease of use. You have all of your buttons laid out right on the camera. You see them, they're fully available. You don't need to go dig through the menus like certain cameras these days make you do. Everything is right there, available, ready to use. For those of you who are just getting into photography and perhaps you're wondering whether this camera is too complicated for you, I don't think it is. I mean, this camera at the end of the day has an automatic mode that you can switch on, and the camera will decide the settings for you when you point it at something based on the light availability, etc. However, I do think that it is a good camera for a beginner to have because, again, as I said, all of the buttons are right here. If you spend about an hour with this camera, you will be ready to go and you will be familiar with it. You do not need to go into menus or change anything. Everything is right here available for you. And later, when you decide to be a professional, you already have a full-on professional camera. Now, for some of you, you might say, well, it's 10 years old, I don't know, man, new cameras have come out, their image quality might be better, blah, blah, blah. Certainly, the image quality has gotten better. The science behind sensors and processing speed has gotten better. However, for the most part, to an average person, the image that you will take with this camera and edit, and the image that you will take with a camera with, let's say, Nikon D850 that just came out, and you will edit it, most people will not see the difference. I promise you. I should also mention that this is not a sponsored video. Nikon has nothing to do with this. They did not give me the camera. I bought this camera used with my own money. They did not tell me to go make this video. I'm doing this on my own volition. I just think that this is a great camera, and especially for the price right now, it is one of the best full-frame cameras for the price available on the market today. You can get this camera, I've looked online on eBay and places like that. I saw it anywhere from $500 to $700. Full-frame, truly professional camera between $500 and $700. What I would suggest to people, especially the people who are starting out, is get this camera and spend the rest of the money, I don't know, depends on your budget. I mean, if your budget is 20,000 bucks, then go ahead by any means, purchase whatever you want. But if your budget is anywhere between $500 to $1,000, I would say buy this camera, and for whatever other money you have, get the glass. Glass, glass, glass. Lenses make all the difference. Which lenses? We will cover that in another video. Another nice feature on this camera is the fact that it has a screen right on top that tells you what shutter speed you're on, what aperture you are on, as well as it tells you which format you're shooting in, whether you're shooting in RAW or JPEG. It also tells you which mode you're in, if you're in manual or automatic or shutter priority or aperture priority. It also tells you, if you press the ISO button, it tells you which ISO you're on. And one of the nice things about this screen is that you can see it in the dark. If you push the button to the side, it illuminates the screen, so you don't have to pull out, I don't know, your phone as a flashlight and look at it. You can literally light it up just by press of a button, and you can see all of your settings, which is really nice, especially when you're shooting in low light situations such as concert scenarios, theater scenarios, and stuff like that. Now, one of the drawbacks to this camera, and for some people it is a drawback, for me it is a drawback in certain situations. This camera is pretty loud. The shutter is pretty loud in this camera, so it is a great tool. However, it is not the tool that I would use if I'm hired to shoot, let's say, a stage play, or if I'm shooting a church service, or if I'm shooting anywhere, or behind the scenes photography, for example, at a film shoot. This is not the camera that is discreet, and the shutter noise is, for those situations, can be really distracting if you're shooting, you know, actors, or if you're shooting a church service, it can be really distracting to an audience or to the performers. So for something that is completely silent, I would recommend another camera, which I will make a video about in the near future. But for everything else, anything that does not require being discreet, this camera is perfectly great. The maximum rate on this camera is 5 frames per second of continuous shooting. If you get an additional battery grip, it's going to expand it up to 8 frames a second. A battery life on this camera is also very good. Usually a battery or 2 will last me a whole day of continuous shooting. Now, one thing I will tell you when inquiring about this camera, wanting to purchase it, whether it's going to be eBay or it's going to be KEH or any other used camera retailers, is make sure you inquire about the shutter actuations on the camera. Considering that this camera is 10 years old, you're never going to find it brand new. Unless, somebody is selling it as a piece of antique or something, and in that case it will be more expensive than some of the newer cameras. But for those of you who don't know what shutter actuations is, it basically means how many times somebody clicked the shutter button and how many times the shutter was used. It's basically the same thing as inquiring a mileage on your vehicle. A lifespan of a shutter on this particular camera is somewhere in the realm of 150,000. Therefore, if you see this camera on sale somewhere for $400, I would be skeptical about a shutter count. And if somebody doesn't tell you the shutter count, or they don't know the shutter count, I would be skeptical about purchasing the camera from those individuals. Most professionals, if they use the camera when they're selling it, usually list the amount of actuations that they have on the camera. And those will be the people from whom I would purchase the camera. So that's it, y'all. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you have any more questions about this Nikon model or just photography questions in general, questions about gear, please leave those comments in the comment section down below. If you like it, please give it a thumbs up. If you don't like it, give it a thumbs down. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and let me know what you want me to cover in the next video. Thanks for watching.